Good evening and welcome to the Morgan Library and Museum series of virtual public programs. My name is Philip Palmer and I am Curator and Department Head of Literary and Historical Manuscripts at the Morgan Library and Museum. I am absolutely delighted tonight to welcome our two esteemed speakers, Dr. Carla Hayden, the 14th Librarian of Congress, and the Morgan's Director, Dr. Colin B. Bailey. Tonight, they'll be speaking on the subject of the research library today. Dr. Hayden, Dr. Bailey, welcome.
Lovely to be.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
So it's really great to see such incredible turnout for this event, and I think we're in for a real treat this evening. I want to remind our audience that you can ask a question through Zoom's Q&A function, and we will get to select questions at the end of the program after the main conversation concludes. Our speakers tonight really need little introduction as they're two of the leaders of some of the greatest cultural institutions in the United States, indeed in the world. Suffice it to say that Dr. Hayden has had a transformative impact on the Library of Congress since her 2016 appointment by then President Barack Obama. And we are thrilled to have her in conversation tonight with the Morgan's director, Dr. Bailey, who has brought new ideas and energy and strong leadership to the Morgan since he arrived in 2015. So to start, with two such distinguished cultural leaders as yourselves, rather than try to give a condensed version of your quite impressive, quite lengthy CVs, perhaps we might begin by hearing a little bit from each of you about your background, about your training as a librarian, Dr. Hayden, as an art historian, Dr. Bailey. So what career paths brought you to the positions that you hold today? Dr. Hayden, if I might ask you to begin.
Well, I have to start with a confession. I am an accidental librarian. I had majored in history and political science in undergrad. I was wondering what I was going to do next. And in the midst of looking for employment, while I was thinking about things, I discovered librarianship. And someone introduced me to it and said, they're hiring anybody with a bachelor's degree. And what I found is the place that I love the most and the thing I love to do the most, reading. There was a profession. And then from there, I went to major in librarianship and went to graduate school, like children's librarian, young adult librarian, museum librarian, and knew that bringing information to people was my calling.
Dr. Bailey, if you'd like to.
I'll jump in too.
About your background, yeah.
I'm in some ways, I'd never planned to really work in museums, and I studied history at Oxford as an undergraduate, and there was no art history taught at that level at that point. I became fascinated by the history of French art, particularly inspired by a wonderful professor, Francis Haskell, who became my supervisor. I went on to do a doctorate, lived in Paris, worked, thinking that I'd be an academic. And then something transformational. I had a fellowship at the old Getty Museum to work in their paintings department and to actually work in a museum. This was the first opportunity, did not exist at the time at Oxford. And being in a museum, talking to different publics, a museum that was acquiring works of art, that really shaped my trajectory. I was very, very lucky. I had junior position at the Philadelphia Museum. I then went on to work in museums in Texas and in Canada, gradually always wanting to come to New York, and finally ending up at the Frick Collection in 2000. And I thought I would stay as a senior curator, and then I changed again in 2008. I was participating in a curatorial leadership program with the idea that I might one day be able to lead an institution. And that finally happened in 2013. So late in my career, I directed for the first time, the Fine Arts Museums in San Francisco, coming to the Morgan in 2015. And really very pleased that I've had this long itinerary before I landed here.
Were there any role models or mentors that were very important in shaping your career paths as you were moving through your career? Dr. Hayden.
I have to say that I had a wonderful role model, and I'm very fortunate that she's still with us. My mother, who started as a classically trained musician, piano, and had to make a shift later in life to go into social work and human services. So I got a chance to see a combination of discipline, practice in terms of the musicianship, preparing, and then helping others. And that combination was something. And then along the way, I had so many mentors and people who would reach out and help me along the way in the profession and outside of the profession. So I was very fortunate along the way.
I would say I look to, in some ways, two people. One who is still living, a man called Pierre Rosenberg, who was director of the Louvre, but the head of the paintings department, who's in some ways a formidable and quite terrifying scholar and curator, but also who led the Louvre and led it. And through him, I think I could see that you could continue to engage in scholarship and be involved in your area of interest, but you could also channel energy to run an institution. And my first boss, who sadly died just a couple of months ago, a curator from Philadelphia called Joe Rischel. Joe was married to Anne Darnoncourt, the director of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And Joe hired me in 1985, and it was my first job. No one was more of a mentor than he, and not only to me, to many, many people. And that aspect of engaging with a junior curator and bringing them on is something that has always been very, very much a model for me. I like to think that is the ideal way of working.
I think these questions really show that, the origin story, so to speak, of many of us in libraries and museums, it's not always an encounter with an object or a place, but it's with people and it's with building those relationships. Let's turn now to the institutions that you do lead today, but maintain or focus on this development over time. So obviously, these are two storied institutions with many decades of development over time. How have your institutions changed over the years, both during your tenures, but also more generally from their inception to today?
Well, I'd like to just start because the Library of Congress began with $5,000 purchase, John Adams, for 600 books, primarily law, for a new nation and members of Congress. And for a while, that was enough, a few thousand books. But then the British came, and there was an unfortunate fire in the Capitol where those books were. And Thomas Jefferson had retired to Monticello. And that was 1814, he sold his collection. And at that time, the largest and most diverse personal library in the United States, 6,000 volumes. And it had the Quran and things in other languages. And he said, there's no topic to which a member of Congress might not have occasion to refer. And from then on, the idea of having a broad base of materials for Congress to refer to was the creed. 1870, the Library of Congress became the administrator of the U.S. Copyright Office, and that allowed the library to expand the collection even more. And now, in collecting in 470 languages, half of the collection is in languages other than English. So the library serves Congress. Still, that's the main mission, but the people it serves.
We're a smaller enterprise, and we started with John Pierpont Morgan's library himself, which we're learning he really took root towards the end of his life. And when he had McKim build the beautiful library on 36th Street, he didn't really have a sense of what he was going to establish. It was his son, Jack, who actually created the institution, which opened created in 24. The new building opened in 1928. And for the next 80 years, the institution was primarily based on the areas that Morgan had collected: printed books and bindings, rare books, illuminated manuscripts, medieval and Renaissance, literary and historical manuscripts, and old master drawings, until really, I would say until the 1990s, there was an outgrowth, adding modern and contemporary drawings, adding photography, adding buildings, making the research library more open and accessible. But we are an institution that was a bibliophile's haven, and still is, but has opened the doors wider and wider every decade, I would say.
And during your tenures at the Library of Congress, at the Morgan, what do you see as the largest changes that have happened? And those could be in response, of course, to larger trends in the world of libraries and museums.
For the Library of Congress, I mentioned that it serves the nation. It's a public library in that sense. The biggest change has been making sure that some of the collections, as many as possible, that can be digitized, unique collections, the papers of 23 presidents, 36 Supreme Court justices, Orville and Wilbur Wright, Rosa Parks, Leonard Bernstein, are digitized and made available. And in this current environment, we've seen that being able to reach out and connect as many people as possible to the Library of Congress so that they understand that this is their library too. It's a national library, has been a real push in the last decade. And my predecessor, Dr. James Billington, even started with that digitalization project.
I know I saw the Rosa Parks pancake recipe, and those
yes,
quite delicious. Have people recreated those?
Yes, they have. And what's been happening during the pandemic time, when most of just about all of our programming is virtual, we've had and designed a special page, Engage, and there's a special site, Cooking with History. So you have Thomas Jefferson's recipe for macaroni and Rosa Parks peanut butter pancakes. And then we have staff members that are demonstrating those types of things. So making the collections relatable and useful too. And I know that the Morgan does that with your education programs. That's been a real focus for you.
I would say, and we have been always committed to excellence in scholarship and in supporting scholarship. And that has been in all the departments and in our curatorial direction. That's a constant. I would say, I mean, my predecessors we're going to talk about the first director of the library, Belle da Costa Greene, a little later on, but her successors, Frederick Adams, Charles Ricecamp, William Griswold, these were Charlie Peirce, these were, in many cases, these were literary figures and academics. And the idea of a museum as well as a library was really introduced when the museum changed its name after Renzo Piano's edition to create a full campus. And by adding museum to library doesn't in any way devalue the bibliographic and bibliophilic work, but it also indicates that we are engaging different audiences. And with our particular strengths in the collection, also gave us a chance to add in 20th and 21st century art and photography, and music has become also more and more important, as well as our Morgan book project with Title I schools in the New York area. We can be all of these things, and we do them all very well. I would say that the foundation is still this extraordinary collection and the expertise of the curators, conservators, and educators who look after it, add to it, and bring it out to the world.
And Colin, I have to jump in with that point because the collections are notable and significant. However, if you don't have the staff members to help researchers, to be there for scholars, to be in education departments, it's just a mausoleum.
Yes.
And they are the people who make the collections come alive.
And we've seen, we've seen this with some of the more, in a way, the more arcane material, like a medieval illuminated manuscript. How would this have something to offer to 8 and 9-year-olds in the 5 boroughs? Well, it does, because the curators and the educators have found ways of explaining how, like one can tell one story, one can illuminate a story, one can physically put the books together as medieval artists did. And there is no hesitation on the part of of the school children of different ages to just jump in and let their imaginations run riot. So that is very encouraging, while at the same time, we also have some of the most important early books that are being digitized and pored over by scholars, learning new things about the Gutenberg Bible almost every time our curators delve into it.
And that's one of the things that we are really focused on. We want to grow scholars and encourage young people to think of scholarship and research as something exciting, a history detective, or just getting into it. And those early experiences, when we ask curators and librarians to think about what was the moment when you were 8 or 9 that turned you on to history, or what was it that made you the scholar that you are today?
And we also want them, I'm talking a bit personal, my own experience early on when I was a researcher coming to the work at the Morgan Library, as it was the Pierpont Morgan Library, it wasn't always so easy to get access. It wasn't always so, you felt a little intimidated. You would be asked why you would do, why you wanted to do something. And I've seen the way, yes, we still want people to be very thoughtful and responsible, but I've also seen how the reading room and the staff, the curatorial and library staff, are just doing everything they can to make that experience of being in front of original materials as enjoyable and as, in a way, as exciting as possible, while at the same time being very careful about the handling of these materials themselves. Hence, digitization is such an important avenue to get people acquainted with the material before they need to come and see it in real, as it were, in real life.
And, you know, I think this focus on outreach and access really has a very long history at the Morgan, and it goes back to Belle da Costa Greene, the first director of the Morgan in 1924, and before that, J. Pierpont Morgan's librarian. I found some documents recently where she's inviting and hosting a class from Columbia University's library school, you know, to look at manuscripts, and she's working with scholars to make sure they have the access to the collection items they need. So to focus a little bit now on Belle da Costa Greene, obviously she's played an incredibly important role in shaping the Morgan as we know it today. Dr. Hayden, I remember when you visited the Morgan last November, that was just so fun. And we were able to see, you know, the Joe Davidson bust of Belle Greene and a letter she wrote, among other items in the collection. And, you know, I wanted to let you know that in 2024, we are planning something very special around Belle Greene, a major exhibition to commemorate the centenary of the museum as a public institution, 1924 to 2024. And I wanted to ask you, what are some facets of Belle Greene's professional life, of her career, that you would most be excited to hear about in an exhibition? What stories about Belle Greene should we tell?
Well, I have to take this opportunity to show my copy of An Illuminated Life, because when this came out in 2007, as a librarian of color, a woman, to read this book, to see when she said, just because I am a librarian doesn't mean I have to dress like one, and her feistiness and her combination of excellence and scholarship, and the idea that as a woman of color, though, she couldn't really identify as that in her career, was something that resonated in so many ways, because you realize that, like the Langston Hughes poem, Dream Deferred. And then when you see the photo of her years later, she devoted her life. She never married, she never had children, but the fact that she devoted her life to making sure that the Morgan and the collection reflected the best, and was this beacon for so many researchers, and did it with a little flair and did it with a little style, was really something. And so I love this book and I love her story, and I'm so appreciative to the Morgan, and that you will have an exhibit, and that she is being recognized for what she did.
We're learning more and more about her, and the story. We now have the full archive from Mutati of her letters to Bernard Berenson, who was her lover early on and then her mentor. Yeah. She burned all of the letters he sent him. Luckily, he kept all of the letters that he received from her. So there are 700 of them. I've been working a little bit on the origins of the library itself, where she was identified by Morgan's nephew, Junius Morgan, at Princeton, as someone who could come in and work with his uncle and work a little bit with him. I think initially Junius thought he might have become the librarian. What I'm astounded by is how quickly she can learn the things she needs to learn. I read a letter just a couple of days ago where she's talking to Berenson and saying, I'm learning Italian, I'm learning bookbinding, I want to read the Hypnerotomocophilia Polyphily so that I can understand it better. And you know, she's 30 years old. How she was able to, and she led a very active social life, as you've alluded to. She wasn't someone who, you know, stayed in, as it were, but she becomes a leading figure in the connoisseurship of medieval illuminated manuscripts, identifying false artists, identifying for Morgan the best books, the best incunabula, the best illuminated manuscripts to purchase, and his son Jack has complete confidence in her. How she gradually accumulated the knowledge, the experience, the eye, the contact. She was clearly not hesitant to ask people to help, the best people.
Yes.
Reed, Bernard Berenson, Fairfax Murray. That she was not, you know, she was not shy in getting advice. And it's quite an extraordinary story, which we're going to be telling in much more detail.
At a very complicated time, but that thirst for knowledge. And when you think about how many other people could have had that opportunity and what we can do now to encourage people, they don't have to hide their identities or worry about those types of personal things in that way. And it's a wonderful story.
Well, Colin mentioned the letters from to Bernard Berenson that are already taught me, and we are transcribing all of these letters as we speak. We're about halfway through a first pass of all the letters right now. So we are creating basically a very large research archive for understanding her life and career through those letters. There are many other sources, of course, we're hoping to travel to see in the coming months as the world maybe returns to more of a normal place. But certainly having the digitized letters has been crucial during the shutdown for us. Dr. Bailey, I was wondering if you could remark a little bit about being a director at the Morgan, you know, in the wake of Belle da Costa Greene, but in the wake of other directors as well. Could you remark a little bit about some of your directorial predecessors?
Yes, as I mentioned, there was a very strong literary connection, a strong Princeton connection that is also part of Belle's own experience. And in a way, there was such a sense of the importance of the collections and the quality of the collections that the Morgan, if you're looking at the Morgan in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, it really just had a mission that was so clear to acquire, to study. It was, in some ways, it did not look to modernize very, very quickly. I would say, from my perspective, there were internal rules. You didn't buy the work of an artist if he was born after 1830, which meant you didn't have Renoir or Cézanne. Rules that were made by, in a way, to, I think, just to keep the integrity and the sort of focus on where the museum was particularly strong. And what I've loved about my experience here and about seeing the Morgan grow is that from the support to open door, to increase collections, to add modern drawings, to add works by the Impressionists, Picasso, Matisse, to begin to collect photography as an art as well as a documentary adjunct into the collections. All of these have been supported by trustees who themselves have been collectors and then have encouraged curators to come, and the curators then, who have added in new departments, have been led in some ways by the excellence and the authority of the collections already in place. And so, and when we're looking at work of living artists, to be in the Morgan means something to looking at the work of living writers. Morgan was interested a little bit in modern literature, not in modern art at all, and did not really engage with the living creators. Through the Carter Burden collection that we have all sorts of representation of different literary movements, different stages of literary production, from broadsheets to scripts, to novels, to first editions. And that really brought us into the 20th century. That was completely supported by the board and the previous directors. So what I'm trying to say is there's a sort of momentum at the Morgan that I think has been growing, particularly in the last few decades.
Thinking about the legacy of Belle Greene a little bit and the Morgan as a public research library. Obviously, the Library of Congress has long been known as a public research library. And while the Morgan and the Library of Congress are in some ways very different institutions, they both at their heart are public research institutions. My question to you both is, and this gets at the title of our event this evening, what role do research libraries play in society today? And I think considering recent events, what role do libraries play, particularly in relation to social justice? And I wanted to ask, focus on you for a second here, Dr. Hayden. When you led the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, you made this, what I would call a heroic decision to keep the libraries open after the murder of Freddie Gray and to provide spaces of, quote, refuge and relief and opportunity. And I love that anecdote of the young man who applies for some jobs the morning after you made that decision and gets some interviews a couple days later, surely because the library was open. So can you discuss that decision more, its impact on the community, and how it relates to this larger question of the relationship between libraries and society?
I have to refer to another book, Palaces for the People, by Eric Kleinenberg, NYU professor, that really discusses that role and mentions things like the Ferguson, Missouri library that stayed open and became a community center and a school. And with the library in Baltimore, that was the only resource that so many people had to get information to children after school with homework help. You could imagine, and my colleagues in the public library realm right now are very concerned that when people need them the most, when they need a trusted source, when they need a place that they can have the librarian who can help them figure out what's going on, health information, that they have to be physically closed. So that aspect of being accessible to all, because one of my predecessors, Spofford, in 1897, when the books in the Capitol were just too much, designed what's now the Thomas Jefferson Building. He said he wanted it to be a book palace for the American people, accessible for all. And he developed a reading room for the blind in that sense. So the idea that libraries, even though you might have to have some certification or get a card or do things, but they are places that people can be inspired by, get materials to be inspired by. They can find out things that they're interested in, but that being accessible to all has been a watchword for research libraries, academic libraries, public libraries. That's the thread that ties them all together.
Accessible and authentic as well. I think we are in some ways a sort of laboratory. We're small. We have the New York Public Libraries a few blocks away, branch libraries throughout the city, university libraries. But we are in a mini Library of Alexandria in a way, and we can try things, and we can also engage at a very sort of serious level topics that might not always be something you know about, but your curiosity is piqued, and the language in which you show things and the way in which you talk about the books or the manuscripts or the art is one that is not in any way it's not exclusive. It allows people with a curiosity to enter something they might not have been aware of. And for me, that is a role of a museum as well. And I think the quality of our collections allows us to, as it were, punch above our weight, because we are very small, but we have many areas.
Also, the beauty of having specialized libraries that you could refer people to. So you have the general libraries, and the specialness of the Morgan is that it is special, and you can do a deeper dive into different subjects. And so that being able to say, well, you have to go to the Morgan for that, or you have to get on their website is where I think the strength.
I'm so glad you say that, Carla, because when we put our digital, our catalog Corsair, when it went live in 2003, and it's been added to, we have over 300,000 entries, but also we have been trying to support the cataloging of individual collections with, even if they're not digitized, at least to get information about some of the literary and historic material on our catalog, so that someone searching and thinking about work they want to do on bishops in 19th century Salisbury could actually find a reference at the Morgan, and it would lead them somewhere that they couldn't have thought they would find. So that is so much the power of our cataloging. I know that you're very keen.
In library school, and I say library school, it dates me because now they're information science schools and things, but in library school, the catalogers, we had a joke, were the most powerful people in the profession.
Indeed, we can't do anything without great cataloging. It all starts there. And, in the department I run, Literary and Historical Manuscripts, we have incredibly detailed contents notes about individual letters, and that allows the sort of full text searching that Dr. Bailey has just mentioned. So speaking of initiatives, I'm wondering if you can tell us more about any initiatives that you have started at your institutions that you're particularly proud of having accomplished. And there's a follow-up question to this about challenges. So you might even think about the two in concert with one another.
Well, I'll start with carrying on the digitization efforts and really accelerating those efforts and getting those collections online. And it has been even more important with the things that we're doing with the education efforts, teaching with primary resources. For instance, that Cooking with History grew out of that, having lesson plans, making it easier for educators and now families and individuals to wade through our digital resources, and to also have exhibits that relate to things that are happening in the culture. The women's suffrage exhibit. We even had a baseball exhibit. We have the world's largest collection of baseball cards. The All-Star game was there, connecting our collections to what is happening, notable events, Rosa Parks with civil rights and anniversaries that we can draw on. And social justice now, the Library of Congress has the NAACP collection, the largest and most referred to collection. You can imagine that during this time with the Legal Defense Fund, the papers of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and even back to the connections to Frederick Douglass and some of the things that are being talked about with the Civil War and all of those things. So that effort has been something that I'm very pleased to work with the librarians and the curators to make the collections more accessible and usable in a time that people are seeking information. They want to know, well, what was the original document? What was that?
In some ways, research has grinded to a halt in some senses, but not at collections that are so well digitized like the Library of Congress is. And that's I think, a very welcome situation for researchers right now. Dr. Bailey.
I would also just draw attention to the way we have a very robust exhibition program. Each season, these are slightly the old days where we had 3 seasons a year, 2 or 3 different departments in each season, a mixture of visual, older, newer, and for me to try and make visual the literary, the historic, the poetic, just as we make our art exhibitions very focused, and sometimes we collaborate with large institutions, sometimes we do something entirely on our own. That to me has been, the ambition has been exciting to see what we can realize through the importance of the collection, through the importance of opportunities. The David Hockney show that we have up at the moment is a show that was in London for just 3 weeks before the pandemic, and we're hopeful that this can be seen until the end of May. That type of engagement, the Morgan is able to do. And I would also say something that I'm very proud of, and we can talk more about, is opportunities for offering experience, targeted, monitored experiences for the next generation. And there, our Belle da Costa Greene Fellowship, which is in its inaugural year, is something that every single colleague has been devoted to making sure we can do as well as we can. But we have other programs in other departments. In the more curatorial fellowship, the Edith Gowan Photography Fellowship. These are mentor, in a way, apprenticeships for bright young scholars to come and spend 1 year or 2 years working with every department and being able to see quite how they can imagine their own career going forward. That, I think, is something that we're very committed to.
And Colin, I'm so glad you mentioned the internships, because we've had an internship program at the Library of Congress, but it's been expanded, and we've even had private support for those internships, and specifically for some of the social justice issues and diversity and equity, a partnership with Howard University that's right there in Washington, D.C., to get young scholars to delve into the collections. For instance, Jessie Norman, the opera singer, gave her collection right before she passed to be held at the Library of Congress. And so you have these students that are working paid internships, that's the part too, and fellowships and some of them might not become archivists or even librarians, but they could be an historian and just have that insight into what research in depth is, and discovering new things and bringing things to light.
I think I will just tell a quick story about a project that the Frick had with the Harlem Ghetto School for Film. This was a wonderful project, still ongoing. Every year, a group of kids would come and work at the Frick for a year and then produce a film. They then had an evening where they discussed their experiences. They were asked, what do they want to be when they go on to university? Not one of them wanted to be a curator, an art historian, or an art dealer, or an artist. They had extremely interesting ideas about becoming professionals. This experience for them was absolutely transformative. To do something in this cultural sphere, do it well, understand it. In other words, it's not just training the colleagues that will take our jobs after us.
Right.
It's also in exposing young people of any interest to what experience a museum, a library can offer them, and have that as part of their language, their fluency when they go into the world. And that, for me, was a sort of eye-opening experience. Yes, of course, we want to create the next generations of scholars, of curators, of librarians, of specialists. We also want to create a much broader interest among people who will enjoy coming to our museums and understanding a little bit more about what goes into what they see on the walls. So I think we have a road with two paths.
And it's exciting. It's very exciting, because you know that you are contributing to the enrichment of people's lives, and whichever, if it's going to be a photographer, future photographer, whoever it is, but you have helped them along the way. And that's like what's
helping teach a language, or helping expose to music, it's just reminding people that this is really something available to you, and you will enjoy learning about Jane Austen, or seeing Babylonian seals, or looking at Betty Starr's assemblages, because it's uplifting. And that, just getting people to cross the threshold and feel comfortable and welcome, that is really important for us.
And that's the challenge. You mentioned that. What's the challenge? Making people feel comfortable, because some of these topics and the way the buildings even look might be intimidating to people. And so that's the opportunity. How do you create, and that's what the Library of Congress is doing now, planning on an orientation area and giving people, if they have 20 minutes because they're visiting other places in the area, or they are there for research, how do you do that? And a learning lab for young people. And then finally, a treasures gallery. The Library of Congress didn't have a treasures gallery. So greatest hits. That's where our Gutenberg will be.
Well, that's where we're all eager. We love the McKim. My predecessor, Bill Griswold, did a wonderful thing in 2010-11. He restored the interior of that space, added lighting, added cases, so that going into the McKim, where you saw our recently acquired bust of Belle da Costa Greene, that space is glorious. And I've seen regularly school groups on the floor, on the carpet, looking up,
Yes.
seeing the firmament of decorations, and they are completely spellbound for about 10 minutes. But they are completely spellbound until they have to move on to the next thing. And that, bringing light into that space, we are now working on the outdoors and finishing the building, improving the lighting, adding a garden, but having the interior of the McKim so beautiful and radiant is a great accomplishment.
And mentioning education, Colin, I mean, for me as a curator, and I come from a university library background, that's been one of the most rewarding experiences about the Morgan, being able to work with children and show middle school students collection items. And it's not just that specialized audience, it's for everybody. And I think that's a really important part of our mission, our outreach mission.
And that's a testament also to a new generation of scholarly curators like Philip, who are wanting to expand their expertise and do their research, but also to bring in wider groups to, and I would say that's true for all of my colleagues.
I think so.
To bring in a wider group. It's not simply the scholar who's published his books or her books, not simply the postdoc who is working on a very specific topic. It is also a broader audience.
Yes, and the younger or young at heart librarians and curators are doing that using different methods, social media, being able to have blogs, and all of these things that bring history to life. And it's really fun to hear their ideas and see them get the responses that they do too.
So we're about at the point where we will start asking some questions from the audience. Before we do that, I want to circle back to the personal with which we began this conversation and ask what I think is a fun question. I hope you don't mind answering it, but what are you currently reading right now? I know both of you are big readers. As I can see around Dr. Hayden. And I'd just love to hear more about what you're reading, what you might be excited about reading in the coming months.
Well, one, I have to start Scott Galloway's Post-Corona, From Crisis to Opportunity. I'm looking for context. And then A Place for Everything, The Curious History of Alphabetical Order. That is, isn't it a cool book? And so I'm getting through it. And then with a lot of the things that are going on, I had Isabel Wilkinson's new book, Cast. And I've been going through that because just getting some sense of it. And then for fun, the last MC Beaton Agatha Raisin mystery. That's like candy or dessert.
I know you're a big mystery reader.
Love them.
Mine is rather less exciting. I am finally coming to the closing chapters of Middlemarch. I read this book first about 12 years ago and loved it. And this summer, I try to delve into larger novels. I read Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. I read Anna Karenina again. I just had this yearning to be in a community, and in some ways it has sustained me. I'm getting very close to the end. It's also, I'm reading it this time, I'm just amazed at the sort of idealism and decency of Dorothea Brooke, who makes this unfortunate marriage at the beginning to a very scholarly, very serious, very bibliophile figure who is lacking. And that, in a way, resonated with me. Her privilege, but also her humanity. And in the end, I won't tell you what happens at the end. You probably all know, but I know it's going to end happily. I know it's going to end happily, but it has been for me very comforting in the last couple of months.
That's wonderful. Well, we do have some questions from the audience. I'm going to pull up our window here. and we'll ask a few of them. We have about 14 minutes left. So the first question that I'm going to ask, I'm going to condense it a little bit to its essence, which is basically, with the continued emphasis on STEM in so many areas of the world, in the careers students are pursuing in the university system, where do history and the humanities fit into education today? And where does the research library, of course, how does it function in that consideration as well?
Well, I can tell you that with our education department, they have mined the collections, and for instance, Orville and Wilbur Wright and their calculations, the papers of Carl Sagan, and showing his handwritten drawing of at 12 years old of what a space person would look like, and all the paraphernalia, and Sigmund Freud and Einstein and all of and Clara Barton from the Red Cross, a nurse. So looking at what are the aspects, but then also the papers, the diaries, for instance, of Clara Barton. She suffered from depression. So humanizing people and bringing the humanities and the people who create is one way that we can tie into and have some balance with some of the STEM efforts.
We were very proud of the work that we did around Frankenstein a couple of years ago, when we had an exhibition to commemorate Mary Shelley's book, to talk about the history of it, the succession of it, its connection to science, its connection to women and education. And we created, our education department, helped by the Carnegie Corporation, created a whole curriculum for schools, which was available free to any school that could use it. And we're still able to use that. And I believe it is still active. So we're looking for the next exhibition. I'm sure Belle is going to be one where we can bring in material that will allow us to as it were, permeate the curriculum, and keep hoping that people will come back and look at this material.
To expand to the concept of what is science and inquiry and discovery and all of these types of things. It's not just, test tubes. And that.
Although we borrowed test tubes from, I think, either from
yes, we do.
You.
Yes.
Really great test tubes for that exhibition.
Yes. Yes. But so how do you bring it in?
Sure.
Photography.
Exactly. And our conservation department. There's some fascinating research going on, collaborations with scientists and whatnot, not only at the Morgan, all over the place.
Right. And we found that young people really love the idea that you can use bugs to help with conservation, and just that whole idea of mixing things together and all of that.
Our Morgan project, we offer beetles to the kids because they have to grind them to make the pigment.
They love it.
They love it. Yes, they do.
It's wonderful. So we have a couple questions that are related to remote work during the pandemic. So I'll read this question out. Research libraries can be places that are slow to change. How has the pandemic-related fundamental reorientation of traditional work, to remote work allowed you to change your institutions in ways that you feel make positive impact?
Well, I'll just jump in because we have expanded our telework operation, and it's been interesting to see, for instance, catalogers. We developed a system of catalogers being able to come in a garage, pick up their materials, leave and go out, take them home, bring them back. It has opened up so many transcribing manuscripts. You can still do that by teleworking. And of course, the programming and the education efforts, the direct workshops with school groups, teacher education. So it has, and then the National Book Festival, having that online, author talks, things that we're doing like right now. So that has opened up, even though we were planning some of these things, it has been accelerated during this time.
I'm very touched by the stories I hear from my staff of people coming in to take with their iPhone images of manuscripts to send to a writer, to help a scholar. So at one level, there's the sort of personal commitment. At the same time, we have pivoted, as we were saying, we've just pivoted to an online program where we have more and more content coming through these conversations, seminars, lectures, and they're well attended, and we try and film them so they can be sent out as links. I would say my feeling is we've all been, as hard as it's been, we've been very, very active in the hybrid situation. And we will continue with these types of programs when we can come back, as long as we are longing to be back. But I think this type of broadening of our programming and of our knowledge is here to stay. And that is one unexpected consequence, a good consequence, I think, of this really tough year.
We were, and I know you've had this experience where we had two exhibits that we were very proud of and pleased. The women's suffrage exhibit with the papers of Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. It was wonderful. And the Rosa Parks exhibit, in her own words. And they had to be closed, of course. And what happened was the staff members and the curators developed the online exhibition and tours through, and came in and went through the exhibit and did that. And that showed us, okay, you can still have the physical exhibit in place, but also how can you make the exhibit accessible to people who can't physically come to Washington, D.C.
So we have a question from my colleague Sal Robinson in the Literary and Historical Manuscripts Department, asking if you, Dr. Hayden, could talk a little bit more about the Frederick Douglass collection in the Library of Congress.
I have a personal connection to that. Frederick Douglass was one of the people that, when I was working in Baltimore, his famous saying, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. So the idea of literacy and how important it was and what he did. And then my family's from Illinois and Springfield and the Lincoln connection. So the collection that the Library of Congress has in his own hand, you see the drafts of his articles and his speeches. And I was walking, looking at the collection, boxes and rows of material, because he was very prolific. He just, and I just randomly asked, could I look at a box? They said yes. And I just randomly picked out a folder and opened it. And there in his own hand was his thoughts on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And you could feel his fury through. And that's one of the things about original documents, when you see that. Think about the hand. I've heard John Meacham talk about that. The hand is just expressing something from the brain. And you feel in the paper when he said he was killed, murdered, assassinated. And all throughout the thing, he just kept emphasizing that. And that just gave me chills right there. But that original document, and then to know that you have the Nicolay copy of the Gettysburg Address, that it's been said that Abraham Lincoln might have taken onto the field. So those types of experiences, that's where the research and the seeing the real thing can be just exhilarating.
An emotional impact.
Emotional, because this is the paper. He wrote this, and in their own hand. So that's another exhibit, Colin, that we're thinking about.
We would love to be part of that.
Where you
Belle da Costa Greene's father, Richard Greener, was knew Douglas, of course.
Yes, he did.
And Philip just acquired wonderfully for us a Harvard yearbook from 1870 with graduation photographs that include Richard Greener, which we'd not seen before, and we hadn't had. So we have his daughter, and as you know, the story between father and daughter is not a clear one, not a happy one, but both to have this generation before Belle, who was so engaged in politics and race issues at the end of the 19th century, and to have this young man who was brimming with optimism and capacity to see him graduating from Harvard in 1870, that's very moving too. And that's the first thing I did when I came back to the reading room during the pandemic. I looked at drawings by Butto and Richard Green as the yearbook. And that being actually in front of these objects, as you've just said so beautifully, is exhilarating, electrifying.
I think we have time for one more question. Somebody just commented, Richard Greener deserves to be much more widely known. That's absolutely true. And that's one reason I think we acquired that yearbook, because he is going to be a part of this exhibition in some way. So the final question we have here, could you talk a little bit about the role of conservation in research libraries today? Maybe some initiatives that are going on at your respective institutions.
Well, I have to say, I had conservation lab envy when I visited the Morgan. Your lab with the wood and it's just gorgeous. It's something. And the fact that you can, you have experts who are scientists, who are artists in so many ways, who are making sure that those original documents and items are preserved and conserved for generations to come. People who, that's so important, and they are skilled. It looks like a surgery at times when you go in, but we had an experience recently where the first known photograph of Harriet Tubman, we went halvesies, as they say, with the new National Museum of African American History to purchase this photograph. And our conservationists worked on it and made sure that it was ready to be digitized, and now it's on view at the museum. And so the work of the conservator to make sure that these materials are conserved and preserved for the future is just, you can't imagine what I've seen, what happens when materials aren't conserved, and it's heartbreaking.
We were very fortunate by one of our trustees, Eugene Thor, supported the creation of this Thor Conservation Studio, and the Sherman Fairchild Foundation also very devoted to this. So we have book and paper, photography, modern as well as old drawings. As you saw, it is it's also a place of great learning, because we discover so much more every time we can look so closely. And they too are training book conservators and paper conservators for the future, collaborating with scientists as well. It's very hopeful, I think. We're very proud of that division.
And the Beatles.
That Beatles and gold leaf. That's what the kids love. And glue. They can play with all of those.
The wonder of our collections, they never end. So I think this is probably a good place to end. This has just been an incredibly interesting, rewarding conversation. Thank you, Dr. Hayden, Dr. Bailey, for your time this evening.
So kind of you, Carla, to join us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining.